YouTube, what is going on? Christopher Jerno's Comics. I don't know if today is a sad day for us comic book superhero fans or not, but I'm discussing this issue with Spider-Man in the MCU, Disney, Sony contract issue. So for those that don't know, a lot of reports, a lot of clickbait, in my opinion, came out last night regarding that negotiations could not be met and Spider-Man is now being pulled from the MCU. So I'm like, this is going to be devastating to me if this is legit. But let me go into a few things to prove why, one, negotiations are still open, and two, I don't really see the legitimacy in these claims just yet. But first, let's talk about the statement that Sony released, because before Sony released the statement, there was a lot of different things being said. There was things being said that it's done, it is 100% done, that the talks are still open, they're all these things. And then Sony releases the statement saying basically that blaming Marvel Studios and Disney and Kevin Feige, pretty much saying that it was Kevin Feige that didn't want to keep Spider-Man at the helm, and he didn't want to have producer credits on that anymore because he's too busy with all of his other MCU projects. And Disney went on to say that they hope this changes in the future. But let me explain why I don't think this is completely accurate. For one, now we can look at what Marvel's doing in with Phase 4 and everything that's on Kevin Feige's plate. I get that. I get that. But, and we do have prominent characters like Fantastic Four and X-Men coming along at some point, but that's in the future. Even Fantastic Four, it's going to be at least 3 years until we see them. Now, we already lost Tony Stark and Cap, right? So Spider-Man is that key character that can be held up to that stature, especially from the comic books. Now we can bank on the MCU being its own universe of saying, well, the MCU and these movies are not the comic books, and the success of these characters are not parallel specifically to the success that they had in the comic books. The iconic branding of Spider-Man compared to any other character. Now, let me make clear what I'm trying to say. Black Panther within the MCU can be that next icon because of the success of his first movie. But we don't even have another movie of his in the next few years. So, you know, even Captain Marvel, you know, is going to be the supposed like leader of the new Avengers and all this. And her popularity can grow and really be extremely successful in terms of bringing money in with ticket sales to future movies. But we don't have any of that coming in the next Phase 4. And I don't see Marvel Studios and Disney banking on moving forward without such an iconic character as Spider-Man. So let me explain deeper into what I think is going on. First off, even with Sony's statement, that could mean that Spider-Man can still be in the MCU, but just not with Kevin Feige's involvement. I don't know how that will work, though, because I know Kevin Feige is really hands-on and keeping everything, like, glued together. So I don't see any film or character being overseen without him being involved in some way. So that might not happen. But here's the thing. Here's why I think Marvel and Sony are basically playing a game here. For one, I think, well, when we look at the contract issues, we know that Marvel got their hands on Spider-Man at only a 5% take-in of profits. You know, Sony covered expenses, production budget. We had overseeing with Kevin Feige as a producer, and I believe they handled casting as well. And then, you know, Sony takes in all the bank home, right? Going into this new negotiation, Disney, Marvel wanted 50-50. I think that's extreme. And I'm with Sony for standing their ground and saying, look, we own these. Unlike Fox, who had many years to develop and do all these things, I think Sony is they're at a point right now where they're seeing some success with their Venomverse, which I think the success of the MCU has helped because the MCU is setting that tone and setting the blueprint to want people to come and spend money at the box office to see superhero movies. So even though Venom wasn't like a blockbuster, it was enjoyable and it was financially successful. So Sony says, look, we got something that we think is working. But Sony has to acknowledge the fact that the MCU Marvel Studios and Disney has turned Spider-Man and the Spider-Man franchise into a billion-dollar franchise, something that Sony cannot do. And regardless of if you enjoy the Sam Raimi movies or if you enjoy the Amazing Spider-Man movies, those were ultimate failures in terms of creating a successful franchise, especially financially. They were failures. So if this goes back into the hands of Sony alone, I see it as sort of like a Warner Brothers DCEU issue where it's just crumbling apart. Not to say that there hasn't been financial success within the DCEU, and not to say that some of those movies aren't enjoyable. I mean, look at Aquaman grossing $1 billion. But I do feel like the DCEU as it is, or as it was and should have been, is dead now. It almost doesn't exist, no matter what they do with spin-offs and all this stuff. So I don't think Sony can really afford taking that character back without Marvel Studios involvement. Because one thing I know for sure, you can't reboot this character again. You can't do it. I mean, I don't even have to go into detail there. But here's one thing that comes into play. Tom Holland is still under contract. So if it is Kevin Feige that says, look, I'm too busy with all this other stuff, and I got Fantastic Four coming in, I can bankroll and all that, and everything we do is guaranteed $1 billion. Even if that's the case, Tom Holland is still under contract then to work with Sony. I think it's 1 or 2 more movies. Can this help Sony? I think so, because it allows Sony to not reboot the franchise, at least immediately. It allows them to take the stories and the dialogue that's been going on with Tom Holland's supporting cast, minus like Happy and, you know, anyone that is MCU related, and they can continue Tom Holland's universe again out of the MCU and try to make that work. And I think that helps them, because we've seen Tom Holland. That's what we want now as fans. So there you go. But it's going to be harder for them to do that without being able to maneuver within the MCU, which we obviously, that's where this was going, you know, with Far From Home. It's a conundrum, man. It's just, it's really a mess. So this is what I think is going on, though. To sum it up, I think it's powered plays, okay? I think if Kevin Feige is saying, look, we're good, we got our hands full. If they come at Sony with numbers, with an agreement, right? And Sony says, no, we don't want to accept that. This is Marvel's being cocky, saying, look, everything we do makes $1 billion. We don't need Spider-Man. But, you know, they want Spider-Man still. So this puts Sony up against the wall, because even though Spider-Man is pivotal for Marvel Studios moving forward, Sony needs Marvel Studios more than Marvel Studios needs Spider-Man and Sony, if you catch my drift. So this puts Sony up against the wall saying, oh, what do we do now? So I think Sony's power play is to publicize this as if this is Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios and Disney's fault. It's their doing. They don't want him no more. So what does that do? That riles us up as fans. Just point the finger at Kevin Feige and Disney saying, what are you guys doing? Agree to Sony's terms, because we can't have him being pulled from the MCU. But really, that's Sony being desperate. And this is why I think talks are still open. I think Sony is going to have to really sit back and come back at Disney and Marvel and say, look, okay, we fold. And I don't expect them to fold completely. I don't expect them to fall back on just 5%. I think Disney was being greedy. They want a full control of all the Venom stuff and the Venomverse stuff. It's like, let Sony do that. Let them do that. But this 50-50 thing is too greedy as well. But the 5%, Sony needs to understand that 5% was a gift. And like I said, Disney and Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige have turned Spider-Man into $1 billion franchise, something I don't think Sony will ever do. So where's the middle ground? 15, 20, 25%? I don't know. But guys, I don't think this is the end of Spider-Man and Tom Holland in the MCU. I'm staying optimistic, and let's see what happens over the next few months. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because as you guys know, as a huge Spider-Man fan, Spider-Man being my #1 superhero, if Spider-Man is no longer in the MCU, I'm going to be crushed. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to be crushed. So let's see where this goes. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me hear your guys' opinions. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's a done deal? Do you think that that Kevin Feige is really kind of pulling the strings here and playing with Sony to make a power move? What do you got? So leave some comments. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you have not done so yet. And until next time, guys.